Before we start the show, I really want to tell you that the documentary our team created, The First Hymn, is going to be in American cinemas on March 24 and 26, right around the country. The film tells the story of the oldest Christian hymn ever discovered, complete with words and musical notation. It dates from the 200s AD. In The First Hymn, this ancient song is carefully reworked by the wonderful Chris Tomlin and Ben Fielding. Both the original song and Chris and Ben's recreation are powerful reminders that there is a shared core of the Christian faith going right back to the beginning. It's all about the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the only giver of all good gifts. After a super successful run in Australia and New Zealand, I'm thrilled it's now coming to cinemas across the US on March 24 and 26. It's really soon. I'd love our Undeceptions listeners, especially if you're in the US, to get right behind it. The more people who go to these special nights, the more likely the season is going to be extended. So please tell your friends, drag them along. Tickets are on sale now. Head to thefirsthymnmovie.com to book your tickets today. Thefirsthymnmovie.com. Okay, on to the show. An Undeceptions podcast.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
Fine.
It's good to see you. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Some of you may know who I am. I could not help noticing the empty offices as I came to work this morning, and all of the packing boxes. Now, of course, if you want to leave, that is your right. And if you feel in your heart that you cannot work with your new government, then it is better that you do leave right away. But if you are packing up because you fear that your language or the color of your skin or who you worked for before disqualifies you from working here, I am here to tell you, have no such fear. What is verbatim is verbatim. The past is the past. We look to the future now.
Well, that's a clip from Invictus, the 2009 film directed by Clint Eastwood, starring Morgan Freeman as the late great Nelson Mandela and Matt Damon as the legendary Springboks captain Francois Pienaar. Oh, not everyone knows that. They're the South African rugby union team. And most of this film was set during the 1995 Rugby World Cup. Anyway, this clip portrays Mandela's first day as president of South Africa in 1994. After 27 years in prison under apartheid, Mandela suddenly found himself leading the nation. Unsurprisingly, some people who had worked under the previous regime were deeply nervous at how Mandela would treat them. But within minutes of starting his new job, Mandela apparently said to a colleague, "We know that staff here probably expect us to get rid of them, but that is not the nature of our organisation. I want you to tell the staff here that if they do their work properly, they must feel comfortable that they can stay and do their job." Amazing. Mandela wasn't interested in punishment. He wanted to bring people with him, and he did. When Mandela died in 2013, his biographer, John Carlin, wrote in the Guardian newspaper that he'd achieved a political mission impossible, persuading a whole people, in this case the most racially divided people on earth, to change their minds. Mandela wasn't perfect, but at a crucial turning point in history, he was one of the world's great persuaders. This isn't an episode about Nelson Mandela, as good as that would be. It's about another African, this time a North African, who also relied on persuasion at a decisive moment in history, some 1700 years earlier. Today, After how many seasons have we been going, Kaylee?
This is our 16th season.
There you go. So after 15 seasons, I finally get to talk about Lucius, Caecilius, Firmianus, Lactantius. Lactantius to his friends. Like Mandela, Lactantius found himself on the wrong side of a repressive regime. The brutal persecution of Christians by Roman imperial decree in the early 300s AD. But within a decade, everything changed. Lactantius found himself at the very centre of power as a household teacher and advisor to Emperor Constantine after his conversion to Christianity. In just 10 years, Lactantius went from persecution to influence. And yet, despite that power, he didn't seek revenge on his former persecutors. Instead, he argued for religious tolerance and relied on persuasion, not coercion, to commend Christianity to his pagan friends. Now, we've explored the Great Persecution before, episode 162, and Constantine, he gets episode 61. But this episode is about the in-between period and a remarkable, often forgotten individual who affected that turning point and whose ideas about persuasion over political power are needed today more than ever. I'm John Dixon, and this is Undeceptions. This season of Undeceptions is sponsored by Zondervan Academic. You can get discounts on their special Master Lectures video courses and free chapters of many of the books that we talk about here on the pod by going to zondervanacademic.com/undeceptions. zondervanacademic.com/undeceptions. Every episode of Undeceptions, we explore some aspect of life, faith, history, science, culture, or ethics that's either much misunderstood or mostly forgotten. With the help of people who know what they're talking about, we're trying to undeceive ourselves and let the truth out. The 200s AD, that's the 3rd century, was a rough one for the Romans. They were nearly undone by invasion, civil war, plague, and economic collapse. In episode 162, Persecution Complex, we traced some of the key moments of that century, which saw emperors come and go at a rate only matched by modern Italian prime ministers. The empire fractured. And then finally, it was stitched back together, perhaps hammered back together by strongman leaders like Emperor Diocletian, one of whose policies was to sort out the problem of the Christians. Anyway, my friend Lactantius was born in the middle of this century, around 250. We don't know much about his upbringing, except that he was born and raised in North Africa, which was a highly cosmopolitan part of the empire in that period, and he received a top-tier education in classical rhetoric and literature. Under Diocletian, who came to power in 284, Lactantius travelled to the eastern capital, Nicomedia, not Rome in this period, Nicomedia, where Lactantius landed a prestigious job as teacher of rhetoric at the imperial court. Somewhere along the way, and we don't know how or when, Lactantius had become a Christian, working right under the nose of power. Diocletian's rise to power ended a time of peace for the church. One of the things we tried to point out back in episode 162 is that the persecution of Christians was sporadic in the ancient world. It wasn't constant. It was terrible in the beginning of the 200s, then it was terrible again in the 250s, but then it sort of calmed down for a couple of decades. And the Christians got busy building churches and charities and generally having some influence. So reports the great church historian of the time, Eusebius of Caesarea, who lived partly through the Little Peace and then into the Great Persecution. Anyway, this is where our special guest comes in. Elizabeth de Palma de Giza, Professor of Roman History and Late Antiquity at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Beth wrote this amazing book, The Making of a Christian Empire, Lactantius and Rome.
What Eusebius says is that Christians were building big churches. They were serving in administrative roles. They had special dispensation not to have to sacrifice if they were holding office. And this is putting those two things together allows us to argue that this really is almost full legal rights, or maybe even full legal rights.
So we're talking 260s,
about
70s?
260 to the period of Diocletian.
Yep.
So you have gradually the Christians interpenetrating political, social society. We know that there are Christians in the army, right? So
And Christian philosophers in the academies.
So this is what's happening in the last 40 years of the 3rd century.
As Christians grew in number, some of them, like Lactantius, started rising through the ranks of power. And not everyone liked that. The dominant intellectual force at the time was Neoplatonism, a spiritual philosophy sort of drawing on Plato, but associated in the mid-200s with Plotinus, and then his most famous student, Porphyry, toward the end of the 200s, right in our period. Neoplatonism basically taught that all reality flows from a single ultimate source in a kind of chain of being. It all comes from the One, and the goal of the soul is to return to the One. Later on, Bishop Augustine of Hippo, patron saint of undeceptions, noted that this new form of Platonism actually came pretty close to Christianity, at least closer than any of the other pagan philosophies. But back in Lactantius's time, the Neoplatonists weren't feeling the love. Christianity looked less like a cousin and more like a rival.
At the same time, you're having what I would say is a reaction on the part of these Neoplatonists who do not think that this is the right way to the One, who feel threatened by this movement that seems to be, to cross social boundaries, to be blasphemous, to maybe even be polluting and harmful to the city. And these philosophers who are charged, right, with advising the sovereign, managed to finagle their way into influence at Diocletian's court, probably through his Caesar Galerius and through some oracular priests and making an impression on the emperor that way. And so, as we know today, it's not uncommon for a group once marginalized that comes into, sort of social acceptability to disturb and disrupt the people who had been the brokers of power before and to trigger a backlash, right? And so I think that that's what is happening in the court of Diocletian as these philosophers, who are elite, who have traditionally been the great thinkers of the empire, when they start to be troubled, an emperor is going to listen.
Two of the great thinkers pushing back against Christianity in this period were Heracles, the governor of Bithynia, and the Neoplatonist philosopher Porphyry, the one I mentioned a moment ago. Now, Bithynia, located in what's now northwest Turkey, was home to Nicomedia, the city where Diocletian spent much of his reign. And that made Nicomedia the eastern administrative and military hub of the empire. As governor of the region, Heracles wielded real influence, and he was listening closely to the philosopher Porphyry, and neither of them had any time for the Christians.
So Hierocles is very much on the side of these philosophers. Before becoming governor of in Bithynia, he was in Antioch.
So is that Syrian Antioch?
Yes,
Okay.
Syrian Antioch.
Where there are a lot of Christians.
Where there are a lot of Christians.
By the 200s.
Right, and in Rome as well, where Plotinus was teaching. So you see, these are kind of flashpoints of tension. So Hierocles, coming through this Neoplatonist tradition, being quite persuaded by these arguments that this was the proper philosophy, this is the way not only for one soul to ascend to God, but the philosopher should advise the emperor so that the whole empire can be a reflection of the divine cosmos. He's so influenced by this that when he comes to be governor of Bithynia, he brings this teaching with him. And he has the ear of Galerius, the Caesar. And through Galerius, they arrange for their case to be heard by Diocletian. They organize what we would call a conference in the palace, where Porphyry, who is Plotinus' student and probably an acquaintance of Hierocles, presents the arguments in favor of clamping down on Christian worship.
And Porphyry's a big deal,
yes.
Right? Give my listeners a sense of how big a deal he is, philosophically speaking.
Right. So Plotinus is the leader of the Neoplatonist movement, was teaching in Rome in the mid-200s. Porphyry was his most illustrious student, and we know actually about Plotinus's work through Porphyry, who wrote a biography of Plotinus and who edited all of Plotinus's teachings. In the late 200s, early 300s, Porphyry is the spokesman for this particular movement. And, I think that it's hard to know at this point how, I think he's a more complicated, interesting character than he is represented in, let's say, the Christian press, for whom he is the archenemy. It's not clear to me that he would have necessarily sanctioned the violence that ensued against the Christians, but he presented his thoughts on why Christianity was mistaken, why the worship of Jesus as a human being was mistaken and polluting. And
even though he didn't say Jesus is an idiot.
No.
Did he?
No. In fact, he thought that Jesus was a worthy spiritual guide.
Which is actually a more powerful argument in some ways, isn't it?
That's right.
We love Jesus.
That's right.
It's fantastic.
Yes.
It's you lot that have elevated him.
Yes. And Hierocles at the same time is part of this conference and presents either something of Porphyry's own or his own, where he's comparing different works of what Christians would call scripture and finding, mistakes between them. So if you line up the various canonical gospels, they disagree about many things.
One woman at the tomb, four women at the tomb, before dawn, after dawn.
Right.
Yeah.
No one at the tomb.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in an effort to discredit Christianity, this is Hierocles' argument.
Okay, so we've got a kind of technical Bible argument,
That's right.
and then a very high-level philosophical argument. That's pretty powerful. Yeah. Christians must have felt a little bit under the squeeze.
Yeah.
Porphyry despised Christianity, and his arguments laid the intellectual groundwork for that terrible repression Christians were about to face.
How can these people be thought worthy of forbearance? They've not only turned away from those who from earliest time are referred to as divine among all Greeks and barbarians, and by emperors, lawgivers and philosophers, all of a common mind, but also in choosing impieties and atheism they have preferred their fellow creatures. And to what sort of penalties might they not justly be subjected who are fugitives from the things of their fathers? Porphyry, Philosophy from Oracles.
So, Diocletian, though, is hosting these this little talk fest against the Christians. Yeah. All his courtiers are there.
Yeah.
The elites are there. Academics are there.
Yeah.
Sitting in the audience is a very learned Christian.
Yeah.
Who has to listen to this stuff. Lucius Lactantius.
Yeah.
What must he have been thinking as he's sitting there listening to this stuff?
Over the decades that I have been thinking about him, he's become more and more well-rounded, better and better known to me. When I first started working with him, he was interesting intellectually. In our current environment, the poignancy of his position has really come home to me more and more, especially recently. The feeling of having, this is now, we're in 303, he's probably in his 60s. Yeah. So for his entire adulthood, Christianity has been legal, and he's been able to move freely. Diocletian had Christian courtiers beyond him. He was there as a professor of rhetoric, probably as a lawyer, maybe even working in the chancery, drafting legal documents. To sit in that audience and hear the way the conversation was going, his heart must have just fallen out of him. It's just this prickle of fear, this sinking feeling that the world as you know it is no longer.
By the year 303, Lactantius's worst fears were realised. Diocletian kicked off what became the worst persecution of Christians the empire had ever seen.
And now Diocletian raged, not only against his own domestics, but indiscriminately against all. And he began by forcing his daughter Valeria and his wife Priscia to be polluted by sacrificing. Eunuchs, once the most powerful, who had chief authority at court and with the emperor, were slain. Presbyters and other officers of the church were seized, without evidence by witnesses or confession, condemned, and together with their families led to execution. In burning alive, no distinction of sex or age was regarded, and because of their great multitude, they were not burnt one after another, but a herd of them were encircled with the same fire. And servants, having millstones tied around their necks, were cast into the sea. Nor was the persecution less grievous on the rest of the people of God. For the judges, dispersed through all the temples, sought to compel everyone to sacrifice. The prisons were crowded. Tortures, hitherto unheard of, were invented, and lest justice should be inadvertently administered to a Christian, altars were placed in the courts of justice, hard by the tribunal, that every litigant might offer incense before his cause could be heard. Lactantius, on the deaths of the persecutors, chapter 15.
That terrible account, written by Lactantius himself, reflects just how violent and dangerous this period was for Christians. Plus, subscribers are about to hear Beth's thoughts on how Lactantius might have navigated this terrible period. Head to the show notes to see where to sign up if you want to listen to that extra. What we know for sure is that shortly after the persecution broke out, Lactantius left Nicomedia, at least left being public in Nicomedia. Though we're not quite sure whether he was being hunted down or because of his reputation, he was just allowed to lie low. A few years later, he popped up again, not in the east, but in the west, Trier, in what's now Germany. And he was given the job of tutor to Crispus, the son of the new Emperor Constantine. Before he undertook that assignment, though, he used his persecuted downtime to write his magnum opus, the Divine Institutes, and they are awesome.
Okay, so he's lying low, he's lost his job, he's lost rank and status, and having been at the centre of the court now is, sidelined. So he does what any good academic does.
Yes,
he writes a book.
That's right.
He uses the sabbatical.
Yes, right. What else would you do?
I balk at saying defending Christianity. It certainly does that, but it does way more than that.
Yeah, it does.
And you are the one who has, I think, proven it's a lot more significant than a defense of Christianity.
So he calls it the Divine Institutes. This is the way you will learn about the divine law.
Yeah. So okay. So it's He thinks of it as a kind of legal, social, theological, philosophical, moral work.
Yeah.
It's not a textbook on the Christian faith as
No,
such.
not at all.
Yeah, which is really interesting. And does he not draw inspiration and even style from the great Cicero?
Oh, yeah. He's also a big fan of Cicero. Fortunately,
Cicero, or Cicero, if I was being pretentious, which I'm not, was a Roman politician, writer, and philosopher who lived in the 1st century BC. He's considered one of Rome's greatest orators, and in his day, he argued fiercely in favour of Rome staying a republic instead of transforming into an empire. He lost that one. Even today, Cicero's Latin prose is widely regarded as the gold standard of classical Latin. Very few writers match his quality. Anyway, his arguments cost him his life. He was executed on the orders of Mark Antony in 43 BC.
To me.
They call Lactantius the Christian Cicero,
They
right?
do indeed.
And do you think that's deserved?
Yes, I do. Cicero, you need to remember, it was in a very similar position. We don't think of it that much.
Okay.
A
little bit sidelined, you mean?
Well, in a time of tremendous political upheaval, right? So Cicero is living during the transition of the Roman Republic to an empire, and he knows the big players, and he gets in trouble with them, and he's a senator when Julius Caesar is murdered. And Cicero writes on the Republic and on the laws in imitation of Plato, writing on the Republic and on the laws. And he's trying to imagine how to navigate the system. What would be a good government in this new state of affairs? And Lactantius really sees Cicero as a kindred spirit in that way, because Lactantius also perceives himself as living at just that cusp of transition, that whatever we had is not working anymore, and we need to think about doing something better.
Can I ask you the impossible? Can you give me the 60-second summary of the Institutes?
It is, I think, a manifesto for Christian rule. I think it is a book that is designed for a particular reader or auditor who is going to be the Emperor Constantine. And it's meant to inspire that leader plus a host of elites who might also be listening to it, administrators, army personnel, and so on, that the right way to govern an empire is to have religious tolerance and to aspire to have everyone on an ethical path that leads to monotheistic devotion.
It's pretty audacious, given the time he writes this, in the middle of the persecution, to imagine a Christian empire. I mean, how on earth?
Well, but you need to keep your chronology in mind. So the terrible events of 303 and the edicts of persecution, Lactantius's retirement, Diocletian then retires in 305. Going on in the West, Constantius becomes Augustus. Constantine, his son, who knows Lactantius, has gone out west to join his father.
Because they may have met in court, right?
They likely knew each other fairly well at court.
Mm-hmm.
Constantine had spent a number of years in the Eastern court and in Nicomedia, so they clearly knew each other. So Constantine goes west.
Hey, just chiming in again to say that at this point, the Roman Empire was so vast, it was basically impossible for one person to run it. So Diocletian split the job between 4 rulers. There was an Augustus and a Caesar in the western provinces, and an Augustus and a Caesar in the eastern provinces. Back to Beth.
Clearly knew each other. So Constantine goes west to his father as his father becomes Augustus of the West. By 306, Constantius is dead and Constantine has been raised to the purple by his troops. My thinking is that we know that Lactantius was in Nicomedia between 303 and 305. We also know from Jerome that he was tutor to Constantine's son. I think that he's invited to Trier in these early days. The reason given is to tutor Constantine's son Crispus, but also he is a talented writer, rhetorician, legal administrator, and so it seems to me that, and there are traces within the Divine Institutes as well. It seems to me that he is writing this already in Trier for that audience, and so he is free to really say lots of things about the persecution from this position of relative safety, and to imagine that his patron, who is at least, Christian friendly, could aspire to being this kind of ruler. And I think that in part the Divine Institutes is to motivate Constantine to be that kind of ruler.
Against all odds, Lactantius was again in the court of imperial power, but far away in the west, while the east experienced persecution. But things wouldn't remain dangerous for Christians for much longer. They were about to gain the most unlikely of allies. Constantine was about to become real emperor, and he was going to say he's a Christian. Stay with us. This episode of Undeceptions is brought to you by Zondervan Academic and a new book by Nadia Williams called Christians Reading Classics. Why should anyone, believer or skeptic, bother reading the great works of the ancient Greek and Roman world? What could writers like Homer, Livy, or Plato possibly have to say to modern readers, especially those wrestling with life's bigger questions? Well, that's the question at the heart of Nadia's book, and her answer is quite a lot. Nadia introduces readers to these ancient voices and offers 3 compelling reasons to explore them: to better understand the world Christianity emerged from, to grow in wisdom and character, and intriguingly, to be surprised by joy. You'll have to read the book to find out what she means by that last one. Along the way, she shows how the Christian story both overlaps with and challenges the ideas of the ancient world, and how Jesus speaks into some of the deepest questions those writers were already asking. Truly, it is a fabulous book. If you'd like to learn more, head to zondervanacademic.com/undeceptions. zondervanacademic.com/undeceptions.
Soldiers, we are about to attack Rome. Each of you may have to fight someone dear to you. A father, a brother, a son. This is civil war. History judges sternly those who undertake such a war. I am not afraid of history's judgment, because we will fight under the symbol of justice, the hope of the humble, the oppressed, the helpless, the sign of the cross. I will not force you, any of you, to accept it as your faith. Only those must stay at my side who will fight for the right of every man to live in freedom, without tyranny, intolerance, or persecution.
That's a clip from the 1961 historical epic Constantine and the Cross, starring Cornel Wilde as Emperor Constantine. It gives a pretty romantic vision of Constantine as a pious, compassionate man destined to be a hero of Christianity. There's even a scene where, as a child, he jumps into an arena to save Christians being mauled to death by lions. It didn't happen. Film critics didn't love it. The New York Times called it, quote, one of those ponderous costumed tabloids that trampled history to death and turned what's left of its fragments into boring banalities. Ouch. Still, the real Constantine absolutely deserves a Hollywood blockbuster, quite apart from his Christian significance. But I don't think that's ever going to happen. Anyway, after being proclaimed emperor by his troops in York over in Britannia in 306, he entered into a world of complex and bitter civil conflicts. In 312, he'd made his way from Britain over to the borders of Italy, and he was at war with his imperial rival, Maxentius. It was at the height of this conflict, on the eve of the decisive battle at the Milvian Bridge, that he had his famous vision. Or was it just a dream? The sources are a bit confused. Anyway, it depicted a cross in the sky, and Christ appeared to him. It was this episode, which he said, we actually have his personal testimony, that led him to convert to Christianity. Here's an account of it all from Lactantius himself.
Constantine was directed in a dream to cause the heavenly sign to be delineated on the shields of his soldiers, and so to proceed to battle. He did as he had been commanded, and he marked on their shields the letter X with a perpendicular line drawn through it, and turned round thus at the top, being the cipher of Christ. Having this sign, his troops stood to arms. The enemies advanced, but without their emperor, and they crossed the bridge. The armies met and fought with the utmost exertions of valor, and firmly maintained their ground. The hand of the Lord prevailed, and the forces of Maxentius were routed. He fled towards the broken bridge, but the multitude pressing on him, he was driven headlong into the Tiber. Lactantius, on the deaths of the persecutors, chapter 44.
This was a big deal, not just for the empire, but for global history. I've said before on the show that Constantine's conversion is the equivalent of someone like President Xi of China becoming a Christian. Please, God. The ripple effect was enormous, but it's also really complicated. I have 1,000 contradictory thoughts about Constantine. So let me direct you to that cracking episode we did on his life and reign, back in episode 61, just called Emperor Constantine, with two top-flight Roman historians and experts on Constantine, Alana Nobbs and Doug Lee. Check out the link in the show notes. The world rapidly changed under Constantine, and Lactantius was by his side.
So can we pivot to Lactantius's relationship with Constantine? You've mentioned that they knew each other probably in Nicomedia. Lactantius ends up in the Western court. So this is Trier in Germany.
Now.
Yeah, sorry.
It's also Trev.
306-ish. So does he have two jobs? I mean, I'm trying to imagine. He's there ostensibly as the tutor to Constantine's son. Would that be a demotion? He's just tutoring for some kid?
Right. So people have said this, but how could a guy who was the chair of Latin letters in Nicomedia stoop to being tutor of the prince? We don't know of anyone of Lactantius's generation who had a job similar to that, but later on we do know, for example, a fellow named Ausonius was both tutor to and then became his court advisor. So Cassiodorus has a similar role. Themistocles had a similar role.
Cassiodorus. That's a whole episode.
Yes,
oh my
he does.
Goodness.
He's so cool.
He is amazing.
Yes, he is.
Talk
so
about
cool.
generous spirit.
No kidding. I know.
Here are all the books from Christians you should read. Now, here are all the books from people who aren't Christians you should read. And they're fantastic too.
Right. I know. He's wonderful.
My goodness.
So it wasn't, I think it was not unusual for a man of his stature to have, the emperor would want
the best
for his son, whom he was grooming to succeed him.
And of course, there was a certain philosopher in ancient Greece who had a gig teaching one person.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right.
Aristotle teaches little Alexander.
Just that little fellow, right. So I don't think it was a demotion. And I do think that we can see his fingerprints on a number of documents. So I think that the letter that Constantine sends to the Bishop of Arles to call them together for a meeting has Lactantius's fingerprints right on it. The phraseology is very similar. A few years later, there's a position that we know of that develops when Constantine goes east, when he conquers Licinius, called the Quaestor of the Sacred Palace. And that is an office where you are drafting legislation and you are drafting the emperor's speeches. So when we can see traces of Lactantius's phraseology in this letter to the bishops at Arles, and when you can see traces of Lactantius's ideas and phraseology in Constantine's oration to the saints, that evidence suggests to me that that's the kind of position that he held in Trier.
Yeah, I mean, do you think the Edict of Milan also has echoes of Lactantius?
Yeah.
And then the famous letter, is it 324, the letter to the eastern provinces?
Yeah.
You see Lactantius's commitment to peace in a society through tolerance and persuasion.
Yeah. Yes.
When Constantine became emperor, he embraced Christianity and extinguished all oppressive orders against the faith. Christianity, he said, was now wholly legal. The Edict of Milan, issued in 313, guaranteed tolerance for all faiths. Here's just a bit of it.
We believed that we should give both to Christians and to all men the freedom to follow religion, whichever one they choose, so that whatever sort of divinity there is in heavenly regions may be gracious and propitious to us and to all who live under our government.
Constantine granted Christians equal status with the pagan religions. But contrary to popular belief, Christianity didn't become the official religion of the empire under Constantine. That happened in the 390s, more than half a century after Constantine, under Emperor Theodosius. He's the one who banned pagan religion. Even when Constantine became sole emperor of East and West in the year 324, he could have then imposed Christianity, but he didn't. In fact, he wrote to the eastern provinces to assure them that although he would love everyone to become a Christian, he's very open about that, he knows that wouldn't create peace. He wanted peace above all things, and peace demanded religious freedom. The letter is amazing. It's a public announcement from an emperor in the form of a prayer to God.
My own desire is, for the common good of the world and the advantage of all mankind, that your people should enjoy a life of peace and undisturbed concord. Let those, therefore, who still delight in error be made welcome to the same degree of peace and tranquility which they have who believe. For it may be that this restoration of equal privileges to all will prevail to lead them into the straight path. Let no one molest another, but let everyone do as his soul desires. With regard to those who hold themselves aloof from us, let them have, if they please, their temples of lies. We pray, however, that they too may receive the same blessing, and thus experience that heartfelt joy which unity of sentiment inspires. Constantine, Edict to the People of the Provinces, as recorded by Eusebius, in the Life of Constantine, Book 2, Chapter 56.
As Beth said, there's every chance that Lactantius had a hand in drafting these notices, or at least in sowing the seed of thought deep in Constantine's conscience. We can be confident of this influence because religious freedom, in language similar to that you hear from Constantine, was already a really important theme in Lactantius's earlier argument in his Divine Institutes.
So let's zero in on sort of the later sections of his book, where it starts to get a little more ethical, social, and political. Mm-hmm. Lactantius makes the case for religious tolerance.
Yeah.
A pretty strong case, and more than that, for what you call concord. Can you explain to me the difference between those two things, and then tell me what was his theoretical basis for this quite strong view about religious toleration?
Yeah. So to me, tolerance is simply putting up with something you don't like.
Yep.
So the Romans were not especially tolerant. I mean, we tend to think of them as tolerant because they had a wide variety of
gods. When you're talking about this in the book here, I have these like double lines next to it going, wow, what a strong statement. You don't normally hear that from a Romanist.
No, I know. But they knew what they didn't like.
Yeah.
And whether it's the cult of Bacchus, because men and women were partying together, or whether it was aspects of Manichaeism, they were quite willing to suppress ideas, Judaism, even philosophy from time to time. So they weren't particularly tolerant. They were elastic.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the position of mere tolerance. For concord, Lactantius is thinking a little bit further. It's not that we're in a state where we're just going to be putting up with stuff, open in an open-ended way forever. He really sees this as working toward a particular goal. And his goal really is for everyone to become Christian. But he knows, I think from his own personal experience, that you can't force someone to think something. And so his hope is that if you provide the foundation, the education, the kind of outreach that he's doing in the Divine Institutes, that over time, especially if you have effective, tolerant Christian leadership, that over time society will change and you will achieve the end of a Christian state. And I would say that the fundamental principle is this idea of voluntas in the Latin, the will, right? So everyone has a will, and you can't force the will to do a thing. It has to come from the person.
And he also makes the point that theologically, what God worthy of worship would want us to be forced to love him.
Exactly. You'd be useless to God if you didn't go willingly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll read that wonderful passage where he talks about, religion should be defended by dying.
Yes.
Not by fighting.
Yes, right.
And he makes that statement that sounds so confident. If you have a good argument, debate us.
Exactly.
Surely you could win.
Exactly.
We're not afraid to debate you.
Yeah.
It's the truth that really detains us, not anything else.
Yeah, which is, to me, arguing from strength.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And he
so
says
that's the
as
thing. We mustn't think of Lactantius as this sort of soppy liberal, He is so confident.
Yeah.
He can be relaxed about
exactly
religious plurality.
Exactly right.
It's remarkable and very attractive.
There is no need for violence and brutality. Worship cannot be forced. It is something to be achieved by talk rather than blows, so that there is free will in it. They must unsheathe the sharpness of their wits. If the reasoning is sound, let them argue it. We are ready to listen if they would tell. If they keep silent, we simply cannot believe them, just as we do not yield when they use violence. No one is detained by us against his will. Anyone without devotion and faith is no use to God. But when truth detains, no one departs. If they have any confidence in their truth, let them teach it to us. Let them talk. Let them just utter. Let them have the nerve, I say, to engage in debate of some such sort with us. They realize that nothing matters more in human affairs than religion, and that it ought to be defended with every endeavor. But they are just as deceived in the religion itself as they are in how to defend it. Religion must be defended not by killing, but by dying. Not by violence, but by endurance. Not by sin, but by faith. Lactantius, Divine Institutes, Book 5.
the context for this argument is the most intense period of persecution that the church had faced to this date.
That's my second guest and my lovely, lovely friend, Dr. Kirsten McHarris. Kirsten recently completed her D.Phil at Oxford. That's a PhD, but an Oxford one. And her topic was, drumroll, Lactantius and his arguments about true justice. We've linked to her thesis, which will soon become a book, in the show notes. Kirsten and I caught up for a tea in Oxford just last month in the brand new Schwarzman Centre for the Humanities. It's an amazing building, a mix of library, conference hall and cafe.
So Lactantius's big view about what makes religion meaningful is that religious decisions have to be made through reason. For Lactantius, religion and wisdom are inseparable, and if you have one without the other, you've gone astray. So Lactantius is almost goading his opponents here, saying that they resort to violence because they know they'd lose in a fair debate. And this is because the meaningful part of religion is what happens in your mind, your will, and your heart. So it's your intention to honour God. God doesn't need burnt animals or offerings. It's the loyalty and devotion of his worshippers and in their living a virtuous life, which is truly valuable to him. Now this sounds obvious to us, but it was actually a radical shift in the way most people understood religion. For the average Roman, religion was about performing the rituals the gods and ancestors had handed down. Religion was really important to them, but it was much more about what you do than what beliefs you hold. Lactantius saw Christians being compelled to sacrifice, to offer incense, and said, that person's fingers are performing an act that the rest of them rejects. How is that meaningful? What God just wants your fingers? If the true part of worship happens in the mind, violence can't actually coerce meaningful worship. It can only compel external behaviour. Religious acts require free choice to be meaningful. And so the state should ensure that people have the freedom to make those choices freely. And no God who wants to be worshipped through violence deserves your worship anyway. They're obviously not a good being that you would want to follow.
Lactantius's lengthy chapter on justice in his Divine Institutes is probably the first sustained attempt in Western history to offer a case for the reciprocal tolerance of all religions. And centuries later, his arguments were echoed by one of the most famous names in the modern progress toward freedom of religion. I'm talking about Thomas Jefferson. The Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, drafted by Jefferson and passed in 1786, reads,
"No man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, place, or ministry whatsoever, nor shall be enforced, restrained, molested, or burthened in his body or goods, nor shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious opinions or belief, but that all men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinions in matters of religion, and that the same shall in no wise diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil capacities."
Secular folks sometimes today imagine that Thomas Jefferson, a good Enlightenment humanist, more or less invented religious freedom. It was all wars of religion before that, and, the Enlightenment people gave us freedom of religion. In fact, the idea goes back at least 1,500 years earlier to Lactantius, and probably even before that to the Christian lawyer Tertullian. That's another story. And here's a lovely detail. Jefferson owned a beautiful leather-bound copy of Lactantius and an underlined copy of Tertullian. So we know for sure that Jefferson himself didn't think he'd invented the idea of religious freedom. But Lactantius wasn't just concerned with religious freedom. He believed Christians, perhaps more than anyone, had a duty to pursue a special kind of justice for all.
One of Lactantius's contributions to the history of ideas is that he gives us the first systematic account of Christian moral theology, so ethics, what does it mean to be a good person? And his ethics are centered around justice, which he calls the summation of all of the virtues. He interacts with a whole range of traditions and classical philosophies on justice, and he's aiming to show that the Christians are the ones who are actually able to put it into practice. So the root meaning of justice, particularly in classical philosophy, is to give people what is due to them. And Lactantius splits this justice into two virtues, piety and equity, both of which were important Roman values. Piety, in fact, was a really important component of the emperor's propaganda. They depicted themselves as, we are the pious emperors. And Lactantius says, God created us and he's our Father and Lord, which means we owe him worship or piety. But if God is our Father, then all humanity are siblings, all made in the image of God, and we owe our siblings love and care. So Lactantius is transforming the way people understand justice and piety and extending it more broadly, making it much more demographic and going beyond what was taught by other schools, including the Stoics, who kind of come closest to him on this topic. His argument about justice is grounded in lots of Roman poetry and philosophy, but ultimately he says justice means loving God and loving your neighbour, meaning everyone.
Yeah, without a Bible quote.
Without a Bible quote. It's the Christian great commandment, but he's gotten there by classical philosophy in his premises rather than the Bible.
Yeah. And he really, like that whole...
Hey, sorry to interrupt, but this is a really interesting feature of Lactantius's approach. Unlike earlier Christian public intellectuals, he avoided using the Bible too much anyway. So I had to ask Kirsten to explain it a bit more.
Outsiders. Lactantius hopes his work will go beyond earlier writers because he wants not only to respond to challenges towards Christianity, but to create a positive account of Christianity on its own merits.
Yeah, that's super key, isn't it?
Yes.
It isn't apologetics in the sense of, you say this, but we've got an answer to that. It
Exactly.
goes way beyond,
And so this is Christianity, but he's still trying to be intelligible and persuasive to outsiders, which is really quite unique in the history of early Christian literature.
He's also very conscious of the fact that previous writers had relied on the Bible for their answers and stuff. And he's a little bit critical of that, isn't he?
Absolutely, because he doesn't think it'll be persuasive. He knows that you need eloquence, polished writing to appeal to the intelligent non-Christian. And so he doesn't quote the Bible. Instead, he quotes Roman literature and basically any other philosophical or religious text he can find that he thinks is going to be persuasive. So it's a very different approach to people who were writing about Christianity for Christians. And another really big difference between him and previous writers is that the previous writers would address their works to people like the emperors or judges and say, please don't persecute us, we promise that we're good for the empire, we're not causing you harm. But Lactantius is the first Christian writer who had the social status for emperors and governors to take him seriously. He wasn't writing to faraway authority figures he would never have any contact with. He was writing to his peers, his former students. And so he had a better knowledge of what it would take to persuade these people not to persecute Christians. And since he was one of them, they were much more likely to give him a hearing.
I find that fascinating. And one of the topics Lactantius wants to be heard on, as Kirsten points out, is justice. Greeks and Romans loved the concept of justice, but Lactantius had a special twist on the idea that he wants them all to consider.
And he really, like that whole justice is giving what is due. As soon as you plug equality into that, it changes the whole meaning of justice. Talk us through that.
Absolutely. So the late Roman Empire had a really high level of social stratification. You had a few wealthy elites at the top of the society, probably including Lactantius, and then a large number of poor citizens and slaves at the bottom. And Lactantius teaches the revolutionary idea that in order to be a person of justice, in order to have virtue, you must consider all people to be equal with yourself. Here's a quote from him. He says, God, who created human beings and gave them all the breath of life, wanted all
and gave them the breath of life, wanted all to be on a level. That is, to be equal. And he established the same conditions of life for everyone, creating all to be wise and pledging them all immortality. No one is cut off from God's celestial benevolence, just as he divides his unique light equally between all, makes springs flow, supplies food and grants the sweet refreshment of sleep to all. So he bestows fairness and virtue on all. no one is a slave with him, and no one is a master. For if he is the same Father to everyone, so are we all his children, with equal rights. Lactantius, Divine Institutes, Book 5.
That's amazing.
So amazing.
Hang on, I thought Thomas Jefferson invented human rights and equality.
Lactantius got there first. Lactantius, he doesn't advocate for the overturning of Roman society or destruction of Roman institutions, but he says you need to treat people like they're your equals, even if you're a senator and they're a slave. So equality is to be expressed in humility.
We might do a little sidebar thing on the passage where he talks about our final duty toward humankind is even to bury the pauper who is unknown to us but known to God. We will give them an honoured burial. I mean, that's how seriously he takes this equality thing.
Absolutely.
The last and greatest duty of piety is burial of strangers and paupers, something which those experts in justice and virtue have never discussed. We will not, therefore, permit a creature made in God's image to fall prey to wild beasts and birds. We will return it to the earth whence it came. Unknown to us he may be, but we will fulfill his kinsman's duty. In their absence, humanity will step in. And where a man is mourned, there we shall reckon our duty is needed. Lactantius, Divine Institutes, Book 6.
So one of the ways that Lactantius wants to see this expressed is through generosity. People who have money should give to those who don't, who are poor, imprisoned, foreigners, sick or otherwise suffering. He really criticises the customs of his culture here. He says you shouldn't give to get any kind of honour or reward or repayment.
Which parenthetically was the main idea behind doing good.
Absolutely.
It was reciprocity, like the people you do good to will praise you and give you honours.
Absolutely. But Lactantius sees generosity as a spiritual investment, and if you receive a return in this life, then you've lost your spiritual investment. The classical...
I mean, it sounds like he's thinking of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount there. You will have your reward with the Father, you know, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing, but he doesn't quote.
The classical tradition basically said you should give to the person who deserves it the most, which in Aristotle is the idea of distributive justice, giving according to worth or desert. Lactantius says justice means you give to the person who needs it the most. Justice doesn't begin with the people who are closest to you. It begins with the people who need your help the most.
Wow.
And the goal is that everyone will have enough to survive. And he sees charitable giving as a moral obligation. It's an act of justice that the poor have the right to expect this help of the rich. It's not something that a person might choose to do. He also applies this equality to sexual behaviour. Roman law left men free to sleep around, but said that a woman who sleeps with anyone other than her husband is an adulterer. Lactantius argues that the same definition of adultery and the same standards of chastity apply to both men and women. He says, married couples should adjust themselves to a joint morality and accept the union in a spirit of equality. We must imagine ourselves in the other, which I think is great marital advice even for today.
Yeah.
So these ideas from Lactantius privatized religion and made the individual conscience so much more important in determining religious allegiance. We live downstream of this idea and we enjoy its benefits today.
Lactantius deserves the same airtime we usually give to the more famous early Christian thinkers like Gregory of Nyssa in the East or Augustine of Hippo in the West. Lactantius can be mentioned in the same breath, in my view. His writing on equality, justice, ethics were breakthroughs that we now take for granted. So why doesn't he enjoy the same level of admiration? Well, Beth thinks part of the answer lies with Jerome. Now, that's Saint Jerome, best known for translating the Bible into Latin in the 4th century, which basically gave the West the Bible in the common or vulgar language, which is why we call this the Vulgate. Jerome also wrote a kind of ancient who's who of Christian thinkers. It's called On Illustrious Men. Yes, they were all men. But Jerome barely mentions Lactantius. Jerome was a kind of taste setter of ancient Christians. Being passed over by him was a bit like releasing a great film or an album and then missing out on every end-of-year best-of list. Sort of like that. Jerome does call Lactantius, quote, the most eloquent man of his time. But elsewhere he complains, Lactantius has a flow of eloquence worthy of Tully. Would that he had been as ready to teach our doctrines as he was to pull down those of others. Now, there is something to this criticism. Lactantius didn't write in an evangelistic mode, but I also think great Jerome missed the subtlety of what Lactantius was trying to do. He was trying to explain to his pagan intellectual peers, right in the middle of a terrible persecution, why Christianity makes good sense of our world, of our lives, and of ethics. There's little doubt that people like Jerome and Augustine were, in the end, far more theologically important than Lactantius. But for me, Lactantius stands as a wonderful historical example of generous Christian engagement with elite skepticism. We'll be back in a moment. In Burundi, East Africa, 1.9 million Burundians face crisis levels of food insecurity. My friends at Anglican Aid are partnering with the Diocese of Gitega in the country's capital to try to help out. Their project aims to boost food production by providing seeds, tools and agricultural training for farmers. In just 4 years, food production has improved dramatically with increased crop yields of over 400%. This really works. But Anglican Aid needs your help to keep this going. If you'd like to make a donation, please head to anglicanaid.org.au/undeceptions. I'll give you that link again, anglicanaid.org.au/undeceptions. Every donation counts. Thanks so much. In the book of Psalms in the Old Testament, there's a little Hebrew word, selah. Most people take it as a cue to pause and take it all in. And that's the idea behind Selah tours. They're for people who want to slow down and explore the extraordinary history of Christianity, not just in books, but on the ground. These trips are more than a holiday, and they're much more than a pilgrimage. They are thoughtful, guided journeys through some of the most significant places in Christian history. Experiences that engage the body, especially my tour, you're exhausted at the end of the day, the mind, and for many, the soul. And the memories really do last a lifetime. You can walk in the footsteps of remarkable figures like the Venerable Bede across Scotland and northern England. You can trace the route of the Apostle Paul through Turkey, Greece, Malta, and Rome. And if you haven't had enough of me, I'll be leading a 2-week tour of Israel in late November, early December this year, visiting the key sites connected with ancient Judaism and the life of Jesus as we explore the origins of Christianity together. And by the way, we'll be doing a little half-day side trip to the West Bank to hear about the Palestinian experience in a safe and honest way. Numbers are limited, so we can keep the experience personal. Plenty of time for conversation, questions, and getting to know each other. You can book your trip now at selah.au. That's SELAH.au. Maybe I'll see you there. Let's press pause. I've got a 5-minute Jesus for you. I don't know if this just reveals my own bias, but it seems to me that some of the most universally impressive people in history weren't the bullies or the strong armers or the great CEOs. They were people who pursued great and costly goals, but did so with humility, an other person-centered posture, and a gentleness of speech. They refused to push others around to get where they wanted to go. Now, in the modern period, of course, we think of Nelson Mandela, who we mentioned at the top of the show, a man who, after decades of unjust imprisonment, deliberately turned away from revenge and instead tried to build a fragile, divided nation through reconciliation, persuasion, and moral authority. Or Martin Luther King Jr. People have raised questions about his personal life, and I don't pretend to know what to make of all that. But there's no doubt that the power of his influence came not through coercion or violence, but through patient argument, public witness, suffering, and a relentless appeal to conscience. Or even Mahatma Gandhi. I know he's controversial too in India for various religious and cultural reasons. But the reason he's so revered in the West is that he resisted British rule with words, self-sacrifice, and even love, which he explicitly said he learned from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. These ideas really do come from Jesus. The meek will inherit the earth. The first shall be last, and the last first. Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And of himself he said, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. According to Jesus, real influence comes not through domination, but through service and suffering and humble persuasion. Now, of course, you don't need to remind me that Christians haven't always lived like this. I wrote a whole book about the bullies of church history. But many Christians did live like Jesus. In the pressure cooker world of the first century, the Apostle Paul urged believers, quote, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. In the next century, in one of my favourite early Christian texts, an anonymous Christian explained to a pagan official named Diognetus, did God send Christ to rule by tyranny, fear, and terror? Certainly not. On the contrary, he sent him in gentleness and meekness, as one who saves by persuasion, not compulsion, as one calling, not hunting down, as one loving, not judging. And then, of course, there's Lactantius. Writing in the early 300s, right in the middle of the Great Persecution, he put all this with stunning clarity. Worship cannot be forced, he said. It must be achieved by words rather than blows. Religion must be defended not by killing, but by dying. Now, if that sounds beautiful to you, or at least like a noble ideal, I'm telling you, it's not because of John Locke or John Stuart Mill or Thomas Jefferson or any of the other great modern champions of persuasion and liberty of conscience. It's because of the enduring impact of the one who said that true greatness lies in service, and who didn't just say it, but gave his life as a ransom for many. You can press play now.
What can we learn from Lactantius all these years later?
What can we learn from him? We can also learn that it's a fundamental part of Christianity that all people are equal, all people are equally made in the image of God, and therefore Christianity demands that we treat others as equals, just as important as ourselves, regardless of their social status, their nationality or citizenship, their gender or any other factor. We think of this as a liberal idea that comes from the Enlightenment, but you find it clear as day in this 1700-year-old text. One of Lactantius's other works was On the Deaths of the Persecutors, which modern readers can find quite vindictive and bloodthirsty. He's celebrating the way that the persecuting emperors died horrible deaths. And yet even in this book, he says that it's God's place to seek vengeance and to make things right. It's not the role of the Christians. So Christians should be active in seeking justice and seeking to do good, but they should be absolutely passive, absolutely not get involved in seeking revenge or redress, even for horrific violence that they've experienced. I think his argument, his insistence that people need to be free to make their own religious decisions based on their own reason and conscience still resonates today. And I think if we accept his premises that the important parts of religion are internal, which is a very modern assumption, then we have to follow his argument to its logical conclusion. If we think that the meaningful part of religion is that you mean it in your head and your heart, then any form of coercion will compromise the quality of that religion, and God won't want it. Sadly, it didn't take the church long to retreat from this high watermark of toleration, but that was a failure of the church to live up to its calling, and I think we should be encouraged to take Lactantius at his best and to run with him.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's do that.
If you like what we're doing, there are a bunch of things you can do to really help us out. You can go to Apple Podcasts and give us a review. Or you can go to undeceptions.com and pick up one of our t-shirts from the store. You can become an Undeceptions Plus subscriber and get access to a bunch of extras and our special Facebook group. And if you really want to help our team, please consider making a donation. Go to undeceptions.com, click the oversized yellow donate button and see where the wind blows. While you're there, send us a question by audio or text and I'll try and answer it in the upcoming Q&A episode. See ya. Undeceptions is hosted by me, John Dixon, produced by Kaylee Payne and directed by Mark Porphyry Hadley. Alistair Belling is a writer and researcher. Siobhan McGuinness, our online librarian. Lindy Leveson remains my wonderful assistant, although she's in the north of Norway right now and sent me this most amazing photo in -35 or something. Santino DeMarco is Chief Finance and Operations Consultant. Peter Kosciuszko is our North American representative. Hey, Peter. How are you, mate? You meant to unmute now.
I'm doing well. Great to be on this episode.
And is it accurate to say you're like a contact point for church pastors who are interested in engaging with Undeceptions in North America?
Absolutely. Call me. Reach out to me. Would love to meet with you. Love to connect.
Excellent. Details in the show notes or something like that. Editing by Richard Humwee. Our voice actor today was Yannick Laurie. Special thanks to our series sponsor Zondervan for making this Undeception possible. Undeceptions is the flagship podcast of undeceptions.com, letting the truth out. An Undeceptions podcast.